In 2025, a new apocalyptic disaster movie appears. The boundary of hell is violently torn apart, unleashing countless evil spirits like a tidal wave. Titan monsters rampage through everything. Even ordinary humans fall into a state of madness in an inexplicable way. They kill anyone they see without any rational thought. The entire city quickly becomes a hell on earth. The story begins when Jack and his family go to Bangkok for a vacation. But right after they land, his phone keeps ringing. His wife, Prang, is used to this, as Jack is the youngest officer in the history of his hometown and spends nearly all his time and energy on his work. After checking into their hotel, the couple plans to enjoy their rare holiday. But just as they turn away, their young daughter disappears. In a panic, they search all around the area. Finally, they find her happily talking with a monk. They think it's just a coincidence, but the monk says he knows for sure. He even tells them that he is the gatekeeper of hell and that a disaster is about to happen. At first, Jack doesn't take it seriously, thinking the monk is just being cryptic to attract attention. He takes his daughter and continues to stroll through the shopping mall without noticing a menacing man holding a rifle confidently walking inside. As they reach the center of the mall, the man suddenly starts attacking tourists indiscriminately, without distinguishing who they are. The entire mall hall falls into chaos. Jack, a former soldier, instinctively wants to stop this terrorist attack. He tells his wife and daughter to hide in the restroom, then immediately runs toward the main hall without hesitation. At this moment, the scarred man is looking for targets. Tourists who can't escape cower in hidden corners, trembling with fear. A patrol officer receives a tip-off and quickly rushes to the scene, while a fleet of police cars with sirens blaring surrounds the entire mall building. Jack seizes the opportunity, draws his gun, and aims at the scarred man, demanding he drop his weapon and surrender. But to his surprise, the man remains calm and even praises Jack as a good father. In that instant, the scarred man fires first. Jack quickly dodges to the side while shouting for the braided girl to move out of the way. Unexpectedly, the man pulls the trigger and ends her life. Filled with rage, Jack doesn't hesitate and pulls the trigger. The scarred man is hit by multiple bullets and falls to the ground. At that moment, the patrol officer also arrived at the scene. However, instead of resisting, the scarred man repeatedly thanked Jack, even claiming that Jack was the legendary gatekeeper of hell. After hearing this, Jack felt a chill run down his spine, as the monk he had met earlier had said the exact same thing. As Jack was still bewildered and unsure of what was happening, the scarred man's body suddenly started to explode. Flames shot out from him, seemingly with a consciousness of their own, and began to spread across the city. Brown, not daring to stay where she was, grabbed her daughter and prepared to go outside to seek help from the police. But the people on the street now seemed possessed, acting crazed, attacking anyone without hesitation. Brang had no choice but to take her daughter back into the shopping mall. However, the situation inside wasn't any better than outside. Tourists had vacant, soulless eyes. When they saw Brang and her daughter, they looked like wild animals spotting prey. Fortunately, the crazed people didn't seem too intelligent, so, relying on her motherly instincts, Brang managed to avoid danger. The two of them sneaked through the mall from the front to the back exit, but still couldn't find any sign of Jack. They decided to continue running outside. The street outside was in complete chaos. The deranged people were lost in a frenzy, unable to control themselves. Brang carefully made her way, step by step, guiding her daughter through the madness. They finally managed to slip into a convenience store, quickly locking the door behind them. At this point, they sat down and sighed in relief. Her daughter wanted to find her father, thinking that Jack might have left the mall before they did. She tried calling him, but there was no signal. Then, she noticed a landline phone behind the counter. She secretly picked it up to call, but suddenly, a fat man ran into the store. The two of them hid in a corner, not daring to move. The fat man approached them. In a desperate situation, Brang grabbed a wooden stick and struck him hard before pulling her daughter outside to run. By this time, the whole city had descended into chaos. The two of them decided to go back to the hotel, hoping to meet Jack there. But little did they know, Jack was still in the mall's main hall. When he stood up and looked around, he realized that, apart from the patrol officer, there was no one left. Even the bodies of the tourists killed by the scarred man had vanished without a trace. Neither of them could believe that they had survived the explosion. What was even more bizarre was that the blood on the floor had long since dried, as if years had passed. Jack shook his head. Too many strange things had happened today. He couldn't even understand how the terrorist had exploded on his own. Suddenly, a noise came from nearby. They cautiously moved closer and saw a woman standing in the corner. The officer thought he had found a survivor, but to his surprise, the woman turned around, raised a sharp paper knife, and stabbed him to death. Jack started to feel an intense fear. However, the next scene surpassed all imagination. The woman suddenly leapt up to the ceiling, moving like a demon. Jack didn't have time to react and, while dodging, he fled. Finally, he managed to escape her pursuit temporarily, but he still couldn't understand why the mall had turned into ruins. It looked like a long-abandoned building. Jack thought of his wife and daughter, who were lost, and began searching everywhere. But aside from the ghostly woman who kept following him, he didn't encounter any other survivors. A sense of unease overwhelmed him. Jack secretly followed the woman and witnessed her crawl into a blood-filled hole. All the strange scenes from before flooded his mind, and Jack had a strange feeling. Was he in a different world? Suddenly, just as he was about to despair, a door opened behind him.
Come with me.
When he calmed down and looked clearly, Jack realized it was the monk he had met in the park earlier.
I am Chen.
Confused, Jack wondered why he was here. The monk gently told him not to worry and slowly explained that the world they were in was a realm that connected the human world and hell, a space for lost souls. The disaster happening in the real world had all started from the person chosen by fate to be the gatekeeper of hell. The monk began telling a story that had happened 25 years ago. His father had stolen the supreme artifact of the temple, the Eternal Sutra. But due to his unclean heart, he became possessed during his practice and tried to take over his son's body to continue his quest for immortality. In a moment of danger, the monk's mother intervened, pushing her husband's soul into the otherworldly realm, and her son inherited the power of the sutra. But as he grew up, he sensed the return of the evil soul. Soon, the human world would become a true hell. The monk decided to leave the temple and prevent the disaster himself. With his knowledge of the Eternal Sutra, he knew his father's plot and sought out the lost soul, the scarred man. He put a special drop of blood into him, knowing that if the scarred man died at the hands of the gatekeeper, the two worlds would open, and demons would flood the human world, taking over weak bodies and causing madness and slaughter. Luckily, the gate had not fully opened, and only someone like Jack could stop it. Jack was still in shock, unable to believe that he was the chosen one. The monk continued explaining that Jack was born at a time marked by a prophecy. His mother had died giving birth to him, and everything had been predestined. However, Jack didn't want to be any savior. He just wanted to return to his wife and daughter. As the monk said, if the gates of hell opened fully, not only his family, but all of humanity would be doomed. Thus, despite being uncertain, Jack had no choice but to embark on the path of salvation. But he didn't know where to begin. The monk told him that the first thing was to eliminate the evil minion, the scarred man. Jack hesitated, saying that he had already shot him. Before the monk could explain, a woman's scream echoed from upstairs. Jack immediately rushed up. In the dark hallway, full of four-legged demons lurking, Jack easily overcame them. Was this the hidden power of the gatekeeper? Soon, he found the girl who had been screaming, but to his surprise, it was the braided girl, the one who had been shot by the scarred man in the mall. As Jack stood stunned, the giant skeleton reappeared. He had no choice but to pull the girl and run in desperation. But the space on the rooftop was too narrow, and the braided girl was eventually caught by the skeleton. Witnessing the girl being devoured by the giant skeleton in one bite, Jack was terrified. Just then, the monk reappeared and explained to him that anyone who died with unresolved grudges would wander into the other world. The giant skeleton was the apex predator, hunting and devouring wandering souls in this realm. Hearing this, Jack felt a chill. Could it be that he had already died and was now a half-dead, half-alive being? The monk nodded, confirming it. Jack almost broke down. How could he save his wife and daughter now? The monk comforted him, saying that if the evil souls could cross the boundary between the real world and the other world, he too could return to the real world. However, to do that, they needed to reach a special place. At that moment, Brang and her daughter were still trapped at a bus station, surrounded by possessed people. They had no place left to hide. Fortunately, at a critical moment, the girl noticed a bus carrying other survivors. A kind person on the bus promptly opened the door to let Brang and her daughter on, providing them with a temporary safe place. The bus immediately started and sped off. At that moment, smoke and flames engulfed the city. Perhaps the only place offering any semblance of peace was inside this bus. However, the peace didn't last long. The road ahead was blocked by abandoned vehicles. If they wanted to return to the hotel, Brang and her daughter would have to walk. After a tense journey, the two finally arrived at the hotel they had originally stayed at. Looking out the window, the entire city was ablaze. She tried to call using the landline, but the line had been completely cut off. At this point, Brang had no other option but to sit down and hope that her husband would return soon. Meanwhile, Jack was still crossing the other world, surrounded by evil spirits. Hoping to reunite with his wife and daughter, he put all his strength into fighting and eventually reached the place where the monk had directed him. The monk raised his staff, and a burst of light flashed. Both of them successfully returned to the human world. However, Jack only existed in the form of a spirit and had to possess someone else's body to remain in the physical world. When passing by a mirror, he was startled to see his own reflection, which now resembled the police officer he had encountered earlier. The monk explained that due to the urgency of time, he could only find a temporary body for Jack, as his original body was no longer available. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Brang and her daughter were awakened by a knock at the door. When they opened it, they were shocked to find Jack had returned. However, his eyes were filled with confusion, and Brang felt something was off. No one expected that Jack's body had been taken over by the scarred man's spirit. At that moment, the monk gave Jack a short gun and a dagger, saying that ordinary weapons couldn't harm evil spirits. These weapons were specially made from a metal capable of countering demons. Jack was taken aback. Why was the scarred man appearing at the hotel where his wife and daughter were hiding? Feeling something was wrong, he immediately rushed to Brang's room, but when he arrived, the room was empty. All that remained was a doll, the same one the scarred man had carried with him. A sense of unease overwhelmed Jack. Suddenly, he heard screams from downstairs and rushed down, but forgot that he was no longer himself. As Jack tried to explain everything, the scarred man, in Jack's body, suddenly appeared, ambushed him, and knocked him to the ground while mocking him. Jack, full of anguish, used all his strength to push the imposter off. Just as the two struggled fiercely, Frank picked up the specially made gun. Jack quickly explained that he was the real husband, but Frank had his own judgment. A shot rang out, and Jack fell into the pool, while the scarred man, in Jack's body, climbed up the poolside. At that moment, he no longer needed to pretend. The scarred man raised his hand and opened a red, bloody portal. Jack's soul was immediately sucked back into the other world. The monk stepped forward to comfort them, saying they hadn't lost yet. Thanks to the portal the scarred man had opened, the monk had located the hideout of the mastermind behind all this. This was the perfect moment to close the gates of hell. The two quickly went to an abandoned mansion, where the evil father was performing a ritual to fully open the gates of hell. Meanwhile, Brang and her daughter were also brought there by the scarred man. The bloodline of Jack himself was the key to accelerating the opening of the gate. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Jack appeared with the specially made dagger. His enemies couldn't stand against him, even for a single blow. The scarred man screamed and rushed forward, causing the situation to reach a deadlock. At that moment, evil spirits prepared to attack, but unexpectedly, Prang fired a shot, interrupting the spell. Seeing this, Jack immediately shouted and threw his dagger, killing one of the minions. Prang threw the gun to Jack, who caught it and immediately fired a fatal shot. The scarred man was destroyed, and his soul was pulled into the other world. Just when it seemed everything had ended and peace was about to return, a giant hand descended from the sky. The skull-headed monster was lurking nearby. At this point, the evil spirit had become a lonely being. Jack immediately charged forward and struck the monster with the dagger, seemingly putting an end to the enemy's plan. However, the monster didn't show any sign of weakness. It mocked Jack, asking how he dared to close the gates of hell. As the monster's body turned into a cloud of black smoke, Jack was still confused. How was the gate of hell supposed to be closed? The monk explained that in order to close the gate, one must step through it, meaning Jack would never be able to return to the human world. He would have to part with his wife and daughter forever. Filled with regret for not cherishing his time with them, Brang and her daughter wept as they embraced each other. In the end, Jack could only glance back at them one last time as he stepped into the flames. The moment he stepped through, Jack's body turned to dust in a few breaths. The human world returned to peace. But no one knew that a high-ranking woman had secretly opened the gates of hell once again. This is the full story of the movie Home Sweet Home Rabbit. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to support the growth of the channel. See you in the next videos.